The public imagination is fixated on the wrong vector. Hypersonic missile tests, carrier strike groups, launch on warning drills. This is threat theater, designed for mass consumption. The kinetic cost of a symmetric, peer-to-peer conflict is mathematically prohibitive for any challenger. It is a solvency event for the attacker before the first asset is even deployed. The true protocol for systemic collapse is not a frontal assault. It is paralysis. The target is not the warfighter, it is the data. The objective is not destruction, it is silence. State-backed actors like the Muddywater APT group identified by Cloud-Seq are not merely practicing on critical infrastructure. They are calibrating the primary weapon of this century, the severance of the system's digital nervous system. While legacy media points to the skies, the primary asymmetric vector lies on the ocean floor. RUSI reports confirm that over 95% of global data, including trillions in daily financial transactions, travels through a handful of vulnerable undersea fiber optic cables. These are the arteries of global liquidity. A low-cost autonomous underwater vehicle can achieve what a trillion-dollar military cannot: total economic and communications blackout. The second vector is concurrent and non-kinetic, satellite blinding, not with expensive anti-satellite missiles, but with ground-based directed energy. A coordinated campaign to dazzle and disable the GPS and communications constellations that form the eyes and ears of the entire Western military financial apparatus. The cost is negligible. The impact is absolute. This two-pronged assault creates the strategic endgame, the blind Leviathan, a hegemon that retains all of its kinetic power, its ships, its aircraft, its warheads, but is rendered sensor-deprived, a war machine without targeting data, a financial system without transaction signals. It becomes a creature of immense power, thrashing in the dark, a liability to itself and the entire system it was designed to protect. This is not a theory. It is the blueprint for a solvency crisis. Conflict is not a failure of diplomacy. It is a solvency event. According to analysis from strategic groups like RUSAE, an unpopular war becomes a catastrophic domestic liability. The balance sheet of the state itself is threatened. When a nation's economic and political capital is being drained by a conflict it cannot afford, it is facing a solvency crisis. The primary objective ceases to be victory and becomes financial survival. A state weakened by such a liability cannot compete symmetrically. The kinetic cost is prohibitive. It is therefore forced to pivot to asymmetry. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical imperative. We see the blueprint in reports from firms like Cloud-Seq detailing low-cost, high-impact cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. These are the weapons of an actor who cannot afford a conventional war, but can afford to bleed a superior opponent through 1,000 digital cuts. This asymmetric bleeding is the direct threat vector to the hegemon. With its own industrial capacity hollowed out, a fact mirrored by manipulated trade data, and its global currency system showing fractures in client states, the hegemon cannot sustain a protracted, low-intensity conflict. It is losing the war of economic attrition. Every cyber attack, every currency disruption, is a drain on a system already running on fumes. The hegemon's response is therefore predetermined. To counter a low-cost asymmetric bleed, it must trigger a high-cost symmetric event. It must escalate vertically to a domain of kinetic conflict where its dominance is absolute. This forces the weaker adversary out of the shadows and into a conventional fight it cannot win. Economic weakness is the accelerant. A kinetic clash becomes the final, non-negotiable solvency protocol to prevent its own systemic collapse. The central mechanism for this systemic decay is the inversion of kinetic cost. As documented by strategic analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, the economics of lethality have been shattered. A state invests $5 million in a main battle tank, a pillar of symmetric, industrial-era warfare. An asymmetric challenger fields a $500 FPV drone. This is not a 10-to-1 or 100-to-1 cost disparity. It is a 10,000-to-1 ratio. The tank is no longer an asset. It is a $5 million liability, a target awaiting a low-cost solvency event. This is the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal force has collapsed from the nation-state level to the small unit or even individual level. The ability to bleed a superpower is no longer contingent on industrial capacity. It is now an open-source protocol available to anyone with a cheap drone and a tactical objective. The hegemon cannot win this war of attrition. The math makes it impossible. Its only move is to change the game entirely. The central conflict is not being fought where the legacy media directs your attention. The true battle space is the gray zone, a network of designated proxy laboratories where systemic failure is actively beta tested. These are not random flare-ups of regional instability. They are controlled demolitions on a global chessboard. The entry condition for a state to become a proxy laboratory is a solvency crisis. Observe the Nigerian Naira's collapse to over 1,400 per dollar. This is not a local economic issue. It is a blueprint. When the hegemon's economic gravity fails, its client states detach and become petri dishes for asymmetric vectors. Within these zones, low-cost, high-impact warfare is staged. CSIS and RUSI analysts track threat actors like the Muddy Water APT, cited in Source 3, deploying new malware against critical infrastructure. These are not random hacks. They are probes measuring response times, identifying systemic vulnerabilities, and calculating the precise kinetic cost required for total paralysis. Official warnings about instability in regions from South Africa to Canada are therefore misdirections. They are presented as isolated crises to be managed. The reality is that these are live-fire exercises, staging grounds for testing infrastructure degradation, social cohesion decay, and supply chain disruption protocols before they are deployed against the core of the hegemon itself. The Nuclear Command Protocol is not based on emotion. It is a mathematical equation. The doctrine is designated Launch on Warning. It is a pre-authorized response system designed to guarantee a retaliatory strike upon detection of an incoming attack. The critical liability is the word detection. The system was blueprinted for a world of analog radar, not asymmetric cyber warfare. Analysts at CSIS confirm this protocol remains the bedrock of strategic deterrence. However, the attack vector has mutated. We are no longer tracking physical objects exclusively. We are now defending against digital incursions. Reports from CloudSEK identify state-backed actors like the Muddy Water APT deploying advanced Rust-based implants. These are not simple viruses. They are systemic weapons designed to cripple critical infrastructure from within. This creates the fog of digital war. When a cyber weapon blinds an early warning radar system, the commander faces an information solvency crisis. The screen shows nothing. The question is no longer, are we under attack? The question becomes, is the radar blind because of a system malfunction, a targeted cyber attack, or because the physical radar installation has already been neutralized by a hypersonic first strike? In this scenario, the absence of data becomes the trigger. To hesitate is to risk total decapitation. The systemic protocol, as analyzed by RUSI, forces the commander's hand. Fear of being hit first compels a launch based on incomplete or entirely absent information. The doctrine morphs from launch on warning to launch on ambiguity. This is the mathematical certainty of kinetic escalation, not as a choice, but as the final program response to an economic and digital bleed-out. The purpose of a calibration shot is not to inflict damage, but to measure response. When kinetic escalation becomes the only remaining solvency event, the system must first test the launch-on-warning protocols of its adversaries. The hollowing out of industrial capacity masked by manipulated trade data as documented by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has created a terminal liability. The hegemon can no longer sustain its client states, evidenced by currency collapses like the Nigerian naira. This is a mathematical certainty. This economic weakness invites asymmetric vectors. Reports from RUSI and CSIS confirm state-level actors are deploying advanced cyber-physical implants, mirroring the spear phishing tactics seen in Middle East critical infrastructure. The objective is not destruction, but control. The ability to trigger a systemic shutdown on command. This is not a risk. It is a pre-positioned asset, an undeclared weapon waiting for a signal. The calibration event will therefore target the intersection of physical goods and digital control. It must be severe enough to justify a systemic response, but ambiguous enough to prevent immediate, verifiable attribution. The blueprint is designed for plausible deniability. The target is selected for maximum economic disruption with minimum kinetic cost. The calibration forecast. Within 9 months, expect a cascading logic bomb to trigger a 72-hour shutdown of the Port of Long Beach's terminal operating system and its collocated data center infrastructure. It will be attributed to a catastrophic system-wide update failure. It is the beta test for a full-spectrum solvency crisis, engineered to gauge public panic and test capital controls ahead of the primary kinetic event forecasted before July 2025.